Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I am MK Jabintaj. Today in this video I am giving you the knowledge about the fifth module of the subject Unix programming. For fifth sem CSC, CBCS, PTU students, I am dedicating this video to all the students all over the world. Now let us see module 5 of the subject Unix programming, signals and daemon processes. Signals are software interrupts. Signals provide a way of handling asynchronous events. A user at a terminal typing the interrupt key to stop a program or the next program in a pipeline terminating prematurely. See the table here. See the continuation of the table here. When a signal is sent to the process, it is pending on the process to handle it. The process can react to pending signals in one of the three ways. Accept the default action of the signal, which for most signals will terminate the process. Ignore the signal will be discarded and it has no effect whatsoever on the recipient process. Invoke a user-defined function. The function is known as a signal handler routing and the signal is said to be caught when this function is called. The Unix kernel support of signals. When a signal is generated for a process, the kernel will set the corresponding signal flag in the process table slot of the recipient process. If the recipient process is asleep, the kernel will awaken the process by scheduling it. When the recipient process runs, the kernel will check the process U area that contains an array of signal handling specifications. If array entry contains a 0 value, the process will accept the default action of the signal. If the array entry contains a 1 value, the process will ignore the signal and kernel will discard it. If array entry contains any other value, it is used as the function pointer for a user-defined signal handler routine. Signal. The function prototype of the signal API is as follows. See the figure here. The formal argument of the API or signum is a signal identifier like sig int or sig term. The handler argument is the function pointer of a user-defined signal handler function. The following example attempts to catch the sig term signal, ignores the sig int signal and accepts the default action of the sig segv signal. The pass API suspends the calling process until it is interrupted by a signal and the corresponding signal handler does a return. See the example here program. The sig IGN specifies a signal is to be ignored, which means that if the signal is generated to the process, it will be discarded without any interruption of the process. The sig del specifies to accept the default action of a signal. Signal mask. A process initially inherits the parent's signal mask when it is created, but any pending signal for the parent process are not passed on. A process may query or set its signal mask via the sigproc mask API. See the here syntax. Return 0 if OK, 1 on error. The new mask argument defines a set of signals to be set or reset in a calling process signal mask, and the CMD argument specifies how the new mask value is to be used by the API. The possible values of CMD and the corresponding use of the new mask value are as shown in the table. If the actual argument to new mask argument is a null pointer, the CMD argument will be ignored and the current process signal mask will not be altered. If the actual argument to old mask is a null pointer, no previous signal mask will be returned. The sig set T contains a collection of bit flags. The BSD, Unix and POSIX.1 define a set of API known as sig set ops functions. See the table here. The SIG empty set API clears all signal flags in the SIG marks argument. The SIG add set API sets the flag corresponding to the signal num signal in the SIG masks. The argument, the SIG del set API clears the flag corresponding to the signal num signal in the SIG marks argument. The SIG fill set API sets all the signal flags in the SIG mask argument. All the above functions return 0 if OK, -1 on error. The SIG is member API returns 1 if flag is set, 0 if not set, and -1 if the call fails. The following example checks whether the SIG int signal is present in a process signal mask and adds it to the mask if it is not there. See the example here. A process can query which signals are pending for it via the SIG pending API. See the syntax here. Return 0 if OK, -1 if fails. The SIG pending API can be useful to find out whether one or more signals are pending for a process and to set up special signal handling methods for these signals before the process calls the SIG proc mask API to unlock them. The following example reports to the console whether the SIG termed signal is pending for the process. See the example here. In addition to the above, Unix also supports the following API for signal mask manipulation. See the table. SIG action. The SIG action API blocks the signal it is catching, allowing a process to specify additional signals to be blocked when the API is handling a signal. The SIG action API prototype is as follows. Returns 0 if OK, 1 on error. The struct SIG action data type is defined in the signal.h header as follows. See the continuation here. The following program illustrates the uses of SIG action. See the program. Now let us see SIG child signal and the wait PID API. When a child process terminates or stops, the kernel will generate a SIG child signal to its parent process. Depending on how the parent sets up the handling of the SIG child signal, different events may occur. Parent accepts the default action of the SIG child signal. SIG child does not terminate the parent process. Parent process will be awakened. API will return the child's exit status and process ID to the parent. Kernel will clear up the process table slot allocated for the child process. Parent process can call the wait PID API repeatedly to wait for each child it created. Parent ignores the SIG child signal. SIG child signal will be discarded. Parent will not be disturbed even if it is executing the wait PID system call. If the parent calls the wait PID API, the API will suspend the parent until all its child process have terminated. Child process table slots will be cleared up by the kernel. API will return a -1 value to the parent process. Process catches the SIG child signal. The signal handler function will be called in the parent process whenever a child process terminates. If the SIG child arrives while the parent process is executing the wait PID system call, the wait PID API may be restarted to collect the child exit status and clear its process table slots. Depending on parent setup, the API may be aborted and child process table slot not freed. The SIG set jump and SIG long jump API. The function prototype of the APIs are as follows. See the table here. The sig set jump and sig long jump are created to support signal mask processing. Especially it is implementation depend on whether a process signal mask is saved and restored when it invokes the set jump and long jump APs respectively. The only difference between these functions and the set jump and long jump functions is that sig set jump has an additional argument. If save mask is non-zero, the sig set jump also saves the current signal mask of the process in NV. When sig long jump is called, if the NV argument was saved by a call to sig set jump with a non-zero save mask, then sig long jump restores the saved signal mask. The sig long jump API is usually called from user-defined signal handling functions. This is because a process signal mask is modified when a signal handler is called, and sig long jump should be called to ensure the process signal mask is restored properly when jumping out from a signal handling function. The following program illustrates the uses of sig set jump and sig long jump APIs. See the program here. See the continuation of the program. Now let us see kill. A process can send a signal to a related process via the kill API. This is a simple means of inter-process communication or control. The function prototype of API is as follows. Returns 0 on success, -1 on failure. The signal num argument is the integer value of a signal to be sent to one or more processes designated by PID. The possible values of PID and its use by the kill API are as shown in the table. The following program illustrates the implementation of the Unix kill command using the kill API. See the program here. See the continuation of the program. The Unix kill command invocation syntax is as follows, where signal num can be an integer number or the symbolic name of a signal. PID is process ID. Now let us see alarm. A alarm API can be called by a process to request the kernel to send the sig alarm signal after a certain number of real clock seconds. The function prototype of API is as follows. Returns 0 or number of seconds until previously set alarm. The alarm API can be used to implement the sleep API. See the figure, this one here, program. Now let us see interval timers. The interval timer can be used to schedule a process to do some task at a fixed time interval to time the execution of some operations or to limit the time allowed for the execution of some tasks. The following program illustrates how to set up a real-time clock interval timer using the alarm API. See the program here. See the continuation of the program. In addition to alarm API, Unix also invented the set I timer API, which can be used to define up to 3 different types of timers in a process. Real-time clock timer, timer based on the user time spent by a process, timer based on the total user and system times spent by a process. The get I timer API is also defined for users to query the timer values that are set by the set I timer API. The set I timer and get I timer function prototypes are as follows. See the table here. The which argument to the above APIs specify which timer to process its possible values, and the corresponding timer types are as shown in the box. See here. The struct im herbal data type is as shown in the below syntax. And this is the example program. See, the example program continues here. The set I timer and get I timer APIs return a 0 value if they succeed or a -1 value if they fail. POSIX.1p timers. POSIX.1b defines a set of APIs for interval timer manipulations. The POSIX.1b timers are more flexible and powerful than are the Unix timers in the following ways. Users may define multiple independent timers per system clock. The timer resolution is in nanoseconds. Users may specify the signal to be raised when a timer expires. The time interval may be specified as either an absolute or a relative time. The POSIX.1b APIs for timer manipulations are as follows. See the box here. Now let us see daemon processes. Introduction. Daemons are processes that live for a long time. They are often started when the system is bootstrapped and terminate only when the system is shut down. Daemon characteristics. The characteristics of daemons are: daemons run in background, daemons have super user privilege, daemons don't have controlling terminal, daemons are session and group leaders. Coding rules. Call unmask to set the file mode creation mask to 0. The file mode creation mask that's inherited could be set to deny certain permissions. If the daemon process is going to create files, it may want to set specific permissions. Call fork and have the parent exit. This does several things. First, if the daemon was started as a simple shell command having the parent terminate makes the shell think that the command is done. Second, the child inherits the process group ID of the parent but gets a new process ID. We are guaranteed that the child is not a process group leader. Call sets ID to create a new session. The process A becomes a session leader of a new session. B becomes the process group leader of a new process group, and C has no controlling terminal. Change the current working directory to the root directory. The current working directory inherited from the parent could be on a mounted file system. Since daemons normally exist until the system is rebooted, if the daemon stays on a mounted file system, that file system cannot be unmounted. Unneeded file descriptors should be closed. This prevents the daemon from holding open any descriptors that it may have inherited from its parent. Some daemons of open file descriptors 0, 1, and 2 to dev/null, so that any library routines that try to read from standard input or write to standard output or standard error will have no effect. Since the daemon is not associated with a terminal device, there is nowhere for output to be displayed, nor is there anywhere to receive input from an interactive user. Even if the daemon was started from an interactive session, the daemon runs in the background and the login session can terminate without affecting the daemon. If other users log in on the same terminal device, we would not want output from the daemon showing up on the terminal, and users would not expect their input to be read by the daemon. See the example program here. Now let us see error logging. Error logging. One problem a daemon has is how to handle error messages. It cannot simply write to standard error. Since it should not have a controlling terminal, we don't want all the daemons writing to the console device. Since on many workstations the console device runs a windowing systems, system, a central daemon error logging facility is required. See the figure here. There are three ways to generate log messages. Kernel routines can call the log function. These messages can be read by any user process that opens and read the /dev/k log device. Most user processes, that is daemons, call the syslog3 function to generate log messages. This causes the messages to be sent to the Unix domain datagram socket /dev/log. A user process on this host or on some other host that is connected to this host by a TCP or IP network can send log messages to UDP port 514. Note that the syslog function never generates these UDP datagrams. They require explicit network programming by the process generating the log message. Normally, the syslogged daemon reads all three forms of log messages on startup. This daemon reads a configuration file, usually /etc/syslog.conf, which determines where different classes of the messages are to be sent. For example, urgent messages can be sent to the system administrator if logged in and printed on the console, whereas a warning may be logged to a file. Our interface to this facility is through the syslog function. See the boxes here. Now let us see single instance daemon. Some daemons are implemented so that only a single copy of the daemon should be running at a time. For proper operation, the file and record logging mechanism provides the basis for one way to ensure that only one copy of the daemon is running. If each daemon creates a file and places a write lock on the entire file, only on one such write lock will be allowed to be created. Successive attempts to create write locks will fail, serving as an indication to successive copies of the daemon that another instance is already running. File and record locking provides a convenient mutual exclusion mechanism. If the daemon obtains a write lock on an entire file, the lock will be removed automatically if the daemon exists. This simplifies recovery, removing the need for us to clean up from the previous instance of the daemon program. See the program here. Ensure that only one copy of the daemon is running. See the continuation of the program. Now let us see daemon conventions. If the daemon uses a lock file, the file is usually stored in /var/run. Note, however, that the daemon might need super user permissions to create a file. Here, the name of the file is usually name.pid, where name is the name of the daemon or the service. For example, the name of the cron daemon's lock file is /var/run/croned.pid. If the daemon supports configuration options, they are usually stored in /etc. The configuration file is named name.conf, where name is the name of the daemon or the name of the service. For example, the configuration for the syslogged daemon is /etc/syslog.conf. Daemons can be started from the command line, but they are usually started from one of the system initialization scripts /etc/rc/r/etc/init.d/star. If the daemon should be restarted automatically when it exists, we can arrange for it to restart it if we include a repository for it in /etc/init tab. If daemon has a configuration file, the daemon reads it when it starts, but usually won't look at it again. If an administrator changes the configuration, the daemon would need to be stopped and restarted to account for the configuration changes. To avoid this, some daemons will catch SIG-hub and reread their configuration files when they receive the signal. Since they are not associated with terminals and are either session leaders without controlling terminals or members of the offhand process groups, daemons have no reason to expect to receive SIG-hub. Thus, they can safely reuse it. Now let us see client-server model. In general, a server is a process that waits for a client to contact it requesting some type of service. The service being provided by the syslogged server. In the logging of an error message, the client sends its service request to the server. The server sends nothing back to the client. In the upcoming chapters, we will see numerous examples of two-way communication between a client and server. The client sends a request to the server and the server sends a reply back to the client.